In the gleaming, sterile world of international air travel, status is everything. For Captain Alistair Croft, a veteran pilot with a silver mane and an ego to match, the pristine cabin of his Orion Atlantic airliner was his kingdom. He believed he could spot a person's worth just by their attire. But one crisp autumn morning at JFK's Terminal 4, his judgment would collide with a reality so staggering it would shatter his world. He looked at a young black woman in a simple gray hoodie and saw someone who didn't belong. What he failed to see was the invisible empire she commanded, an empire that included the very ground he was standing on. This isn't just a story about a flight. It's about a fall from grace so spectacular that it serves as a chilling reminder. Never, ever judge a book by its cover. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now, let's get into it. The air in John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 hummed with a familiar organized chaos. It was the sound of 1,000 hurried goodbyes, the rhythmic roll of suitcases over polished floors, and the tinny announcements of destinations that promised adventure or reunion. For most, it was a transient space, a necessary purgatory before the sky. For Zara Sterling, it was something more. It was a symphony of logistics she had orchestrated, a complex ballet of people and machines operating on a backbone of code she had written in countless sleepless nights. Today, however, she was not the architect. She was just a traveler. Dressed in a worn, comfortable gray hoodie, the hood pulled slightly over her head, and a pair of simple black track pants, she looked more like a college student heading home for a break than a titan of industry. Her backpack, slung over one shoulder, contained a laptop that held the blueprints for a multi-billion-dollar expansion. But on the outside, it was nondescript, adorned with a single keychain from a tech conference years ago. She was flying Orion Atlantic, Flight 112, direct to Zurich, first class. The ticket was a necessity, not a luxury. She needed to sleep on the flight to be sharp for the 9 a.m. board meeting that could redefine her company, Aerosphere Logistics. She found her gate, B23, and settled into one of the less comfortable chairs, away from the main throng. She preferred observing, watching the intricate dance of her system in action. She saw the ground crew moving with practiced efficiency, the baggage handlers scanning codes with devices running her software, the gate agents tapping away at interfaces she had designed. A small, private smile touched her lips. It was working. The boarding call for first class echoed, and Zara joined the short, privileged line. The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda with a name tag askew, scanned the first few passports with a forced smile. When Zara stepped forward, Brenda's eyes did a quick, dismissive scan of her attire. The smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "Boarding pass, please," Brenda said, her tone a little flatter than it had been for the man in the tailored suit ahead of her. Zara handed over her phone, the QR code glowing on the screen. Brenda scanned it. The machine beeped affirmatively. Z. Sterling, Seat 2A, First Class. Brenda frowned, looking from the screen to Zara, then back to the screen. "There must be a mistake," she muttered almost to herself. "Is there a problem?" Zara asked, her voice calm and even. "One moment," Brenda said, tapping furiously at her keyboard. She was stalling, her unease palpable. It was at that moment that a figure of imposing authority strode through the door from the jet bridge. Captain Alistair Croft was a man who wore his uniform like a suit of armor. In his late 50s, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a jaw that seemed permanently set in a state of mild disapproval, he exuded an air of supreme confidence. He saw himself as the last bastion of decorum in an increasingly casual world. He despised the erosion of the glamour of air travel, the shorts and sandals in first class, the general lack of respect. He noticed Brenda's hesitation and the cause of it, the young woman in the hoodie. His eyes narrowed. He'd seen her type before, scrounging for an upgrade, using a stolen or fake ticket, Or perhaps a low-level employee using a buddy pass they didn't deserve. What's the holdup, Brenda? Croft's voice was a low baritone, accustomed to being obeyed without question. Captain, Brenda said, relieved and intimidated in equal measure. Her ticket scans for first class seat 2A, but, well, she trailed off, gesturing vaguely at Zara. Croft didn't need her to finish. He turned his full condescending attention to Zara. He didn't speak to her. He spoke at her. Ma'am, he began, the word dripping with false politeness. The first-class cabin is for our premium passengers. There seems to have been an error with your ticket. There's no error, Zara replied simply, meeting his gaze. My seat is 2A. Croft chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. I'm sure that's what the computer says, but we maintain a certain standard on Orion Atlantic. This is a private environment. We can't have people loitering. The insult was as sharp as it was deliberate. Loitering. He was accusing her of being a vagrant in her own terminal. I'm not loitering, I'm boarding, Zara stated, her patience beginning to fray at the edges. A few other passengers in the line were watching now, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. That's not going to happen, Croft said, taking a step forward to physically block her path. He was taller than her by a good foot, a wall of navy blue wool and self-importance. Look at you. You look like you should be asking for spare change, not sitting in a $10,000 seat. People like you are a security risk. How do we know you're not carrying something in that grubby backpack? The prejudice was raw, undisguised. People like you. The words hung in the air, thick and ugly. It wasn't just about her clothes anymore. It was about her age, her race, her perceived station in life. Brenda, the gate agent, looked horrified. This was escalating far beyond a simple ticket query. Captain, her ticket is valid. The system accepted it. Her name is on the manifest. Manifests can be hacked, Brenda, Croft snapped, not taking his eyes off Zara. Common sense must prevail. I am the captain of this aircraft. My authority is final, and I am saying she is not getting on my plane. She doesn't belong. Zara stood her ground, her expression unreadable. The calm observer had vanished, replaced by something cold and still. She had built an empire on logic, on data, on predicting and controlling complex systems. But this was a different kind of system, an old, ugly one built on bigotry, and she knew that logic alone wouldn't defeat it. She slowly reached into her pocket, not for an ID, but for her phone. Croft smirked, thinking she was going to call a friend to complain. Go ahead, he sneered. Call whoever you want. No one is going to overrule my command. Zara didn't say a word. She found the number in her contacts and pressed call. It rang twice. Marcus, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. I have a situation at gate B23. A Captain Alistair Croft of Orion Atlantic is refusing me entry to the aircraft. He says I am a security risk because I look poor. Yes, code red. She paused, listening. 5 minutes. Good. She ended the call and slipped the phone back into her pocket. She looked at Croft, her eyes like chips of obsidian. You have 5 minutes to reconsider your decision, Captain, she said. Croft laughed out loud, a booming, arrogant sound. Is that a threat? Are you going to have your little boyfriend come down here and rough me up? Young lady, you have no idea who you're dealing with. No, Captain, Zara said, a chilling certainty in her voice. You have no idea who you're dealing with. The clock was ticking. 4 minutes and 59 seconds. The 5 minutes that followed were a masterclass in tension. The first-class line had ground to a halt. Passengers from the economy section began craning their necks, sensing a spectacle. Captain Croft, reveling in his perceived victory, stood with his arms crossed, a smug grin plastered on his face. He had made his stand, upheld his standards. He felt powerful, righteous. He occasionally glanced at Zara, who remained perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the entrance to the concourse. Her quiet confidence unnerved him more than any shouting match could have. Brenda, the gate agent, was a bundle of nerves. She kept glancing between her monitor, which clearly displayed Zara's valid, paid-for top-tier ticket and the immovable captain. Her training told her the passenger was right, but her instinct for self-preservation told her not to cross a senior pilot. She was trapped. A lawyer in the line, a man named Arthur Jennings who specialized in corporate litigation, was already discreetly making notes on his phone. He recognized the scent of a lawsuit from a mile away, and this one was a potential landmark case of discrimination. He watched Zara with professional curiosity. She wasn't hysterical or angry. She was waiting. It was the calm of someone who knew the cavalry wasn't just coming, but that she owned the horses, the stable, and the road they were galloping on. At the 3-minute mark, a ripple went through the airport staff. Brenda's radio crackled. All Orion Atlantic supervisors to gate B-23 immediately. All staff, I repeat, all supervisors. Her eyes widened. That was a high-level command, usually reserved for a security breach or a medical emergency. Croft heard it too, but his arrogance blinded him. He assumed it was a response to his report of a potential security risk. He was being validated. "See," he said to Zara, his voice loud enough for others to hear. "This is what happens when you try to circumvent the rules." Then they appeared, not airport police with zip ties, but a phalanx of people in sharp suits. Leading them was a tall, impeccably dressed man in his late 30s. His suit was a tailored charcoal gray, his shoes polished to a mirror shine, and his demeanor was one of absolute, unflappable control. This was Marcus Thorne, Chief Operating Officer of Aerosphere Logistics, and Zara Sterling's right-hand man. Flanking him were the JFK station manager for Orion Atlantic, a portly, sweating man named Frank Miller, and the head of Terminal 4 Security, a stern-faced woman who looked like she chewed nails for breakfast. They weren't walking. They were power-walking, their faces grim. Marcus Thorne's eyes scanned the scene and locked onto Zara. He gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a sign of acknowledgement and reassurance. Then his gaze shifted to Captain Croft, and the temperature at gate B-23 seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Captain Alistair Croft?" Marcus asked. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmurs of the crowd like a razor. Croft, momentarily taken aback by the sheer authority radiating from the newcomer, drew himself up. "I am. And who are you?" "My name is Marcus Thorne," he said, pulling out a business card. "I am the COO of Aerosphere Logistics." Croft glanced at the card. "Aerosphere? The cargo people?" he asked dismissively. He knew of them. They were a fast-growing tech and logistics company that handled a lot of the back-end operations at major airports. An important vendor, perhaps, but not someone who could command him. "We're a bit more than the cargo people, Captain," Marcus replied, his tone icy. "We designed, implemented, and currently manage the entire passenger flow, baggage handling, and ground logistics network for this terminal, and we do that under our parent company." Frank Miller, the Orion station manager, was now profusely sweating. He knew who Marcus Thorne was. He'd been in a dozen meetings with him. Thorne was the man who could, with a single email, make his airline's operations at JFK a living nightmare. "Marcus, what's going on?" Miller stammered, trying to intercede. Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. He kept his piercing gaze fixed on the pilot. "The parent company is Sterling Innovations," Marcus continued, letting the name hang in the air. "It is the private investment and technology firm that, a year ago, purchased a majority stake in the consortium that owns and operates this entire terminal. Terminal 4. The floors you're standing on, the gate you're blocking, the very air you're breathing. It is all, for all intents and purposes, the property of our CEO." Croft's smug expression began to melt, replaced by a confused frown. He still didn't get it. "What does that have to do with me? I'm dealing with a passenger issue." Marcus took a deliberate step closer, his voice dropping to a low, menacing whisper that was somehow audible to everyone nearby. "Captain, you are not dealing with a passenger issue. You are standing in a terminal owned by Sterling Innovations, and you are currently, and very publicly, harassing, demeaning, and denying boarding to the founder, principal shareholder, and chief executive officer of Sterling Innovations." He paused, letting the full weight of the statement land. He then turned and gestured with an open palm towards the young woman in the gray hoodie. "Captain Croft," Marcus announced, his voice now ringing with triumphant clarity. "Allow me to introduce you to your boss's boss's boss, Miss Zara Sterling." Silence. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Brenda, the gate agent, looked like she might faint. The lawyer, Arthur Jennings, let out a low whistle and typed furiously on his phone. Frank Miller, the station manager, went from sweating to a ghostly pale. Captain Alistair Croft stared at Zara. He looked at her simple hoodie, her plain track pants, her backpack. Then he looked at Marcus Thorne, at the terrified station manager, at the head of security, who was now pointedly not looking at him. His mind, which had been so certain, so rigid, was now a vortex of pure, unadulterated panic. The carefully constructed world of his own superiority, built over 30 years of flying, crumbled into dust in less than 30 seconds. The smirk was gone. The confidence was gone. The authority was gone. All that was left was the sickening, gut-wrenching realization of the colossal, career-ending mistake he had just made. Zara finally moved. She took a step forward, her presence suddenly immense. She wasn't just a traveler anymore. She was the queen in her castle, and he was the jester who had forgotten his place. She looked past the captain, directly at the trembling station manager. Her voice was no longer calm and patient. It was cold, hard steel. "Mr. Miller," she said, "Flight 112 to Zurich is critical to a multi-billion-dollar expansion for my company. An expansion that will bring thousands of new jobs and pump hundreds of millions of dollars into the airline industry, including a significant contract with Orion Atlantic. This flight will depart on time." She then shifted her gaze back to the petrified pilot. "But he," she said, pointing a single steady finger at Alistair Croft, "will not be flying it. Not today. Not ever again from my terminal. Get him off the jet bridge. Now." The command was absolute. There was no room for negotiation, no space for appeal. Zara Sterling's words, delivered with the chilling precision of a surgeon's scalpel, severed Alistair Croft's connection to the aircraft as cleanly as a bolt of lightning splitting an ancient oak. Frank Miller, the Orion Atlantic station manager, jolted into action as if shocked by a cattle prod. "Yes, Miss Sterling. Right away, Miss Sterling." He turned to Croft, his previous deference to the captain replaced by frantic, panicked authority. "Alistair, you heard her. Off the bridge. Now. Give me your ID." Croft was frozen, his mind still trying to process the cataclysmic shift in reality. "Miss Sterling, owner of the terminal." His brain replayed his own words with horrifying clarity. "You look like you should be asking for spare change. People like you." Grubby backpack. A cold sweat beaded on his forehead and trickled down his temples. He felt a wave of nausea. "But my crew, the flight," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. It was a pathetic attempt to cling to the last vestiges of his identity. "Your crew will be briefed by the backup captain," the head of terminal security interjected, stepping forward. Her name was Sullivan, and her expression was granite. "We'll escort you." The word escort was not a courtesy, it was a statement of custody. Two of her uniformed officers moved to flank him. The walk of shame was excruciating. As Croft turned, he saw the faces of the passengers. There was no sympathy. He saw contempt, shock, and for some, a grim sense of satisfaction. The lawyer, Arthur Jennings, watched him pass with a look of clinical interest, as if observing a fascinating specimen of self-destruction. The first-class passengers, who moments before had been his subjects, now stared at him as if he were a piece of trash being taken out. He was led not back through the terminal, but down a sterile service corridor, the walk of shame reserved for disruptive passengers or compromised staff. The heavy fire door slammed shut behind him, sealing him off from the world where he had once been king. The muffled sound of the final boarding call for Flight 112 was the last thing he heard from his former life. Back at the gate, the atmosphere had transformed. Marcus Thorne was a whirlwind of quiet efficiency. "Brenda," he said, his voice now surprisingly gentle. The gate agent flinched. You followed protocol up to the point of a superior's direct and frankly illegal order. Your log entries are clear. You are not at fault here. Please continue boarding." Brenda, visibly relieved, nodded and went back to her work with trembling hands, treating the remaining passengers with a newfound, profound humility. Zara watched the last of the first-class passengers board. Frank Miller approached her, wringing his hands, his face a mask of desperate apology. "Miss Sterling, on behalf of Orion Atlantic, I am so sorry. I cannot express our regret. This is not who we are. Captain Croft's behavior was unacceptable, an aberration. We will take the sternest possible disciplinary action, I assure you." Zara turned her cool gaze on him. "An aberration, Mr. Miller, or a symptom? Your captain felt perfectly comfortable using racial and class-based prejudice to deny a paying customer her seat. He felt empowered to do so. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a culture that tolerates it. We'll implement new training," Miller stammered. "A full review." "You will do more than that," Zara cut in. "Alistair Croft is merely the tip of the iceberg. My team will be in touch with your CEO, Mr. Davenport, directly. We will be discussing the penalty clauses in our logistics contract regarding incidents that damage the reputation and operational integrity of this terminal. This little scene has already been filmed by at least a dozen people. By the time I land in Zurich, Orion Atlantic will be the star of a viral video about corporate bigotry." Miller's face went ashen. The financial implications were dawning on him. Aerosphere's contract was worth tens of millions annually. Penalty clauses could run into the 7 figures. The reputational damage was incalculable. "Now, if you'll excuse me," Zara said, her voice softening slightly as she addressed Marcus. "Have the reserve flight crew for the Odyssey prepped and ready. I don't feel like flying commercial anymore." The Odyssey was her private jet, a state-of-the-art Gulfstream G700, always on standby in a private hangar at the far end of the airfield, a hangar that was also, of course, on land she owned. "Already done," Marcus replied with a smile. "Car is waiting for you at the service exit. Flight plan is filed. You'll be in the air before Flight 112 even pushes back from the gate." Zara nodded. She looked one last time at the gate, at the bustling passengers, the complex machine of her own design. She had come here as a quiet observer and been forced to become a ruler. It was a role she never sought, but one she would never shrink from. As she walked away, escorted by Marcus, she left behind a scene of corporate carnage and a dawning horror for an airline that had just discovered who it had offended. Meanwhile, in a windowless room in the airport's administrative block, Alistair Croft was being debriefed by a stern-faced HR representative and a grim-looking union rep who already knew this was a losing battle. His pilot's license wasn't revoked yet, but his wings had been clipped. He was officially suspended, pending an investigation that everyone in the room knew had only one possible outcome. He sat there, the bravado stripped away, feeling utterly naked. He kept thinking of his wife, Clarice, who loved his status as a senior captain, the respect it garnered, the lifestyle it afforded. He thought of his 2 sons in expensive private schools. His entire identity, his entire family's social standing, was built on the foundation of the uniform he had just been forced to surrender. He pulled out his phone. There were already dozens of texts and missed calls. The news was spreading through the airline's internal network like wildfire. But it was one alert that made his blood run cold. It was a news notification from his phone. A major media outlet had already picked up a tweet from a passenger on Flight 112. The tweet included a short, blurry video of the confrontation. The headline read, "Airline Captain bars young black woman from first class for looking poor in viral video." The unraveling had begun. It was fast, it was brutal, and it was only going to get worse. While Zara Sterling was ascending to 40,000 feet in the serene cream leather interior of the Odyssey, sipping tea and reviewing her Zurich presentation, a digital hurricane was making landfall on Orion Atlantic. The initial tweet from Arthur Jennings, the lawyer, was the spark, but he wasn't the only one. Others on the flight, now with their phones off airplane mode as they waited for the new captain, had posted their own accounts. Photos of Croft's sneering face, videos of his confrontation with Zara, and a picture of Zara walking away with the phalanx of suits captioned, "The moment he knew he messed up," were ricocheting across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was trending, soon joined by a new, more specific one, #OrionShame. In his penthouse office in Chicago, Richard Davenport, the CEO of Orion Atlantic, was having a very bad morning. He had just gotten off a furious call from his head of PR, who informed him that their brand was currently being digitally immolated. Their social media channels were a dumpster fire of outrage. Celebrities were retweeting the story, adding their own condemnation. Rival airlines were likely watching with glee. "Get our statement ready," Davenport had barked. "The standard one. We are investigating. We do not tolerate discrimination. This does not reflect our values." All of it. "Sir," the PR head had said nervously, "it might not be that simple. The woman involved, she's not just anyone." That's when Frank Miller's report from JFK landed on his desk, followed by a direct, chillingly polite email from Marcus Thorne. Davenport read it, then read it again. Subject: breach of contract and reputational damage. Incident at JFK T4, Flight 112. The email detailed the incident not as a passenger complaint, but as a corporate grievance. It cited specific clauses in the multi-year $80 million contract Orion Atlantic had with Aerosphere Logistics. Clauses about maintaining terminal security, brand integrity, and professional conduct. It highlighted a particularly nasty penalty clause, Clause 17.b, the reputational hazard clause, which allowed Aerosphere to claim punitive damages and even terminate the contract with prejudice if the actions of an airline employee caused significant public scandal connected to the terminal's operations. And then came the final paragraph. "Ms. Sterling has instructed me to inform you that while she will continue to Zurich to secure a deal that would have greatly benefited Orion Atlantic through increased cargo and executive travel, her faith in our partnership is shaken. She expects a personal call from you upon her landing. She also expects a comprehensive, actionable plan on your desk within 48 hours, detailing how you will ensure this never happens again. Failure to comply will be interpreted as an invitation to activate Clause 17.b in its entirety." Davenport felt a knot of ice form in his stomach. This wasn't a PR problem anymore. This was an existential threat. Aerosphere wasn't just some vendor. Their logistics software was the beating heart of Orion's East Coast operations. To have them pull out would be catastrophic, causing delays and chaos that would make this current scandal look like a picnic. And Zara Sterling, he knew the name. The tech world called her the ghost of the machine. A reclusive genius who had become astonishingly, terrifyingly wealthy in less than a decade. She almost never made public appearances, which explained why no one recognized her, and they had just publicly humiliated her. He slammed his fist on his mahogany desk. "Get me everything we have on Captain Alistair Croft," he roared at his assistant. "His file, his record, his commendations, his complaints, everything." Meanwhile, Alistair Croft was at home. He'd been driven there in a nondescript company car, the driver refusing to make eye contact. He had walked into his pristine suburban McMansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, to find his wife, Clarice, arranging flowers in the foyer. "Alistair, you're home early," she'd said, a bright, brittle smile on her face. "Did the flight get cancelled?" He couldn't form the words. He just stood there, the ghost of the jet bridge still clinging to him. His silence, his pallor, the absence of his usual swagger, told her something was terribly wrong. "Alistair, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse, Clarice," he finally managed to say, his voice cracking. "I think I've seen the devil, and I insulted her." His phone buzzed incessantly. He finally looked at it. A text from his brother. "What the hell did you do? You're all over the news." A notification from his bank, and then a call from the head of the pilots' union. Al, the union head said, his voice heavy. This is bad, real bad. I've seen the videos. There's no ambiguity here, man. They've got you dead to rights on camera being what? Croft asked, already knowing the answer. A prejudiced ass, Al. There's no other way to spin it. The airline is getting crucified. They're going to make an example of you. I can fight a wrongful termination. I can fight a suspension, but I can't fight this. This is a public execution. The words hit Croft like a physical blow. A public execution. Clarice had now seen the news alerts on her own phone. The color drained from her face. She looked at her husband, not with sympathy, but with a dawning horror and contempt. She wasn't seeing her heroic captain anymore. She was seeing a fool who had just torched their entire life. "You idiot," she whispered, the flower she was holding dropping to the polished floor. "You monumental idiot. Do you know what you've done?" That was when Davenport's investigation turned up something interesting in Croft's file. A few minor complaints over the years about his arrogant and dismissive attitude, all smoothed over by his seniority. But there was something else, flagged by HR just 3 months prior. A mandatory financial disclosure for senior pilots had revealed that Captain Croft had significant personal debt. He'd leveraged their home and his pension for a series of high-risk speculative investments that had gone sour. He was financially underwater, clinging to the high salary and prestige of his job as a life raft. For Davenport, this was a small, cruel gift. Croft wasn't just a bigot. He was a desperate man. A desperate man is a weak man, and a weak man is easy to cut loose. Orion Atlantic's first public statement was released. It was brutal and swift. Orion Atlantic has been made aware of a deeply disturbing incident at JFK involving Captain Alistair Croft. His behavior, as captured in widely circulated videos, is an abhorrent violation of our values and the respect every passenger deserves. Mr. Croft has been suspended indefinitely, and termination proceedings have been initiated. We apologize unreservedly to the passenger involved and are making direct contact to express our profound regret. Orion Atlantic will not tolerate racism or discrimination in any form, at any level. There was no talk of investigation, no pending review. It was a direct condemnation. They were cutting him out like a cancer. They fed him to the wolves to save the pack. For Alistair Croft, sitting in his silent, opulent home, the statement was a death sentence. He wasn't just fired. He was disowned. The empire he served had turned on him, all to appease the larger, unseen empire he had so foolishly provoked. The term karma is often used loosely, a simple platitude for when a bad person gets their comeuppance. But for Alistair Croft, the karma that followed his actions at Gate B-23 was not a single swift event. It was a slow, methodical, and cruelly poetic deconstruction of a life built on a fragile foundation of pride and prejudice. It was a masterclass in consequence, delivered not with the heat of anger, but with the chilling, indifferent precision of a glacier grinding a mountain to dust. The first stage was the official execution of his career. It took place not in a public square, but in a soul-crushingly beige conference room at Orion Atlantic's corporate headquarters. Alistair sat on one side of a polished table that reflected his pale, drawn face. On the other side sat Catherine Shaw, the airline's senior vice president of human resources, a woman with eyes that betrayed no emotion, and his union representative, a portly, sweating man named George who looked as if he were attending a funeral. Which, in a way, he was. "Alistair," Shaw began, sliding a thick folder across the table. It landed with a soft, final thud. "This is the summary of the internal investigation. It includes statements from 17 witnesses, the full gate cam footage, and analysis of over 100,000 social media posts mentioning you and our brand in the last 72 hours. The findings are unambiguous." "It was a misunderstanding," Alistair croaked, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "I was concerned about security protocols." Shaw held up a hand, a gesture that was both polite and absolute. "Please don't. The footage shows you verbally harassing a passenger based on her appearance and race. You called her attire grubby. You accused her of looking like she needed spare change. You referred to her as people like you. Then you physically blocked her from boarding. There is no security protocol that justifies that behavior. It was a gross violation of company policy, federal aviation regulations, and basic human decency. George, the union rep, cleared his throat. Catherine Al has 30 years of unblemished service. That's not entirely accurate, George, Shaw countered, tapping the folder. We have 7 prior passenger complaints about Captain Croft's arrogant, dismissive, and demeaning attitude. They were all smoothed over, chalked up to a captain's prerogative. It seems we allowed a culture of impunity to fester, and this is the result. The board sees this not as a single mistake, but as the inevitable endpoint of a long festering problem. You, Captain Croft, are that problem's public face. The dispassionate analysis was more cutting than any insult. He wasn't a man to them anymore. He was a data point in a PR crisis. Termination is effective immediately, Shaw stated. For cause. That means no severance package, no continuation of benefits beyond the legally mandated period. We will not contest your unemployment filing, which is the only concession the board is willing to make. She paused. We strongly advise you not to pursue a wrongful termination suit. Our legal team has been instructed to counter-sue for damages to the brand, and believe me, they will be aggressive. He was fired. 30 years of seniority, of being the king of the skies, erased in a 10-minute meeting. As he signed the paperwork, his hand trembling, he felt the first true crack in the armor of his ego. He thought, perhaps naively, that he could find work elsewhere. A smaller airline, a cargo carrier. He was a highly experienced pilot, after all. A week later, he had a promising video interview with a mid-tier cargo airline based out of Ohio. The interviewer, a friendly man named Dave, seemed impressed by his flight hours and experience with long-haul jets. Your resume is top-notch, Alistair, Dave said, smiling through the screen. Just a formality, but our insurer requires us to ask about the circumstances of your departure from Orion. Alistair tried to frame it carefully. I was involved in a high-profile passenger disagreement. The company and I decided it was best to part ways. Dave's smile tightened. The incident at JFK with Zara Sterling? Alistair's blood ran cold. Yes, that one. The friendly demeanor vanished from Dave's face, replaced by a guarded professionalism. I see. Well, Alistair, thank you for your time. We have a few more candidates to get through. We'll be in touch. The email arrived 20 minutes later. We have decided to move forward with other candidates. The digital door had slammed shut. His name was now more toxic than radioactive waste. The professional annihilation bled seamlessly into social and personal ruin. The doxing had turned his home into a prison. The phone rang constantly with blocked numbers. Some were screamed threats, but others were worse. There was the cackling laughter, the whispered insults, the people who would just play the audio from the viral video of him back to him before hanging up. He decided to brave a trip to the local grocery store, pulling a baseball cap low over his face. He felt the eyes on him in the cereal aisle. 2 teenage girls were whispering and pointing, one of them holding up her phone, clearly filming him. At the checkout, the cashier, a young man who had always been friendly, refused to meet his eyes, scanning his items with a hostile silence. As Alistair paid, the woman behind him in line spoke, her voice loud and clear. Some people have no shame showing their face in public. He fled the store, his heart pounding, leaving a bag of groceries behind. The world had shrunk. His home was a prison, and the outside world was a courtroom where everyone was the judge and jury. This public humiliation was the backdrop for the financial collapse. The first formal notice arrived via certified mail. It was from the bank, a coldly worded letter informing him that due to his change in employment status and significant pre-existing debt, his mortgage was in default. They were initiating foreclosure proceedings. The Greenwich McMansion, the symbol of his entire life's achievements, was going to be taken from him. He showed the letter to Clarice, hoping for a sliver of solidarity. She simply glanced at it, her face a mask of stone. Of course, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. It was inevitable. The next day, 2 men in a tow truck arrived. They were polite but firm. They were there to repossess the BMW 7 Series and the Mercedes GLS. As Alistair handed over the keys, he saw his neighbor, a hedge fund manager named Todd, watching from his window. Todd didn't look triumphant. He just shook his head slowly and drew the blinds. It wasn't anger Alistair saw, it was pity, and pity felt so much worse. That night, the final, most devastating pillar of his life crumbled. The argument with Clarice wasn't a shouting match. It was a post-mortem, a dissecting of a dead marriage. They sat in the cavernous living room surrounded by half-packed boxes labeled storage. "I don't understand how you could have been so stupid, Alistair," she began, her voice a low, trembling whisper of rage. "It was a mistake, Clarice, one moment of bad judgment," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "No," she said, looking at him with eyes he no longer recognized. "It wasn't. This is who you are. This is who you've always been, and I was just too busy enjoying the country club membership to see it. Remember that waiter you berated at the Four Seasons on our anniversary because he poured the wine wrong? You tried to get him fired. Remember the young valet you called an idiot because he couldn't find your car fast enough? You've always been this way, arrogant, entitled, looking down on people you decided were beneath you. The girl in the hoodie was just the one person you picked who had the power to push back. You didn't make a mistake, Alistair. Your character was finally presented with a bill and it turns out you were bankrupt. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. He had no defense because he knew she was right. What about the boys? He asked, a desperate final gambit. The boys? She laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. William's friends at school are sending him the memes of your face. They're calling him Captain Karen's kid. Michael got into a fistfight defending your honor, and now he's facing suspension. You haven't just ruined our finances. You've poisoned your own children's lives with your legacy of shame. I have to protect them from that. I have to protect them from you." She stood up and walked to the mantelpiece, picking up a framed photo of him in his full captain's uniform, beaming beside his plane. She stared at it for a long moment. "I realized something," she said, not looking at him. "I didn't marry a man, Alistair. I married a uniform. I married the prestige, the authority, the way people looked at you, at us. But the uniform is gone, and the man underneath." She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and contempt. "The man underneath is just a bitter, angry bully, and I can't live with that anymore." She placed the photo face down on the mantelpiece. The next week, the divorce papers arrived. Months bled into a miserable year. The house was sold at a loss. After the debts were settled and Clarice took her half, Alistair was left with next to nothing. He moved into a cramped one-bedroom apartment in the grittiest part of Bridgeport. The smell of stale cigarettes and despair clung to the hallways. His days, once governed by flight plans and time zones, were now a featureless expanse of daytime television and the glow of a laptop screen as he searched for jobs. He applied for everything: dispatcher, logistics coordinator, even security guard. The rejections piled up. His name was a permanent red flag. One dreary afternoon, he was staring blankly at the small flickering television in his apartment. A business news segment came on, the anchor speaking with forced cheerfulness. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Aerosphere opens new European HQ in Zurich, creating 2,000 jobs." And there she was, Zara Sterling. She stood at a podium, not in a hoodie, but in an impeccably tailored navy blue dress that radiated power. She was confident, eloquent, a leader addressing her global team. She spoke of opportunity, of building a future that was inclusive, of harnessing technology to bring people together. Alistair Croft, the man who had judged her for looking poor, watched her announce a multi-billion-dollar triumph that he had, in his own small, pathetic way, tried to prevent. The bitter irony was a physical weight, pressing down on his chest. The karma wasn't just that he had been fired or divorced or humiliated. The true, hard karma was the dawning, soul-crushing realization of scale. He had seen himself as a giant, the captain of his castle in the sky. But in the grand scheme of things, he was nothing. He was a small, obsolete man who had stood in front of a tidal wave of progress and, with monumental arrogance, had commanded it to stop. The wave hadn't even noticed him as it rolled on, leaving him drowned in the ruins of a life he had single-handedly destroyed. He finally understood. He hadn't just insulted a passenger, he had insulted the future, and the future always wins. While Alistair Croft's world imploded, Zara Sterling's expanded. The Zurich deal, which had been the catalyst for the entire fateful journey, was a resounding success. The acquisition she finalized positioned Aerosphere Logistics to become the undisputed leader in smart aviation technology across Europe. The 2,000 jobs created were just the beginning, but the incident at JFK had left a profound mark on her. It was a stark reminder that no matter how much success she achieved, the old, ugly systems of prejudice still existed and could surface at any time. She could have chosen to simply ruin Croft and move on, but that wasn't her way. A problem, to Zara, was simply a system with a flaw that needed redesigning. Her call with Richard Davenport, the CEO of Orion Atlantic, had been brief and brutally efficient. He had groveled, apologized, and promised the world. Zara wasn't interested in apologies. She was interested in data and deliverables. "Your airline has a cultural problem, Richard," she had said, her voice calm over the satellite phone from her jet. "Croft was a symptom, not the disease. Your training is inadequate. Your review processes are superficial. Your corporate culture implicitly allows men like him to thrive for 30 years. "What do you want, Zara?" Davenport had asked, the use of her first name a desperate attempt at connection. "Tell me what you want, and it's yours." "I want change," she replied. "Real, measurable change. You're going to tear down your existing diversity and inclusion program, which is clearly just corporate window dressing, and you're going to rebuild it, from scratch, and my team is going to help you." And so began the most unlikely of partnerships. Invoking the reputational hazard clause not for punitive damages, but for corrective action, Zara leveraged her contract to force Orion Atlantic into a radical overhaul. She seconded a team from Sterling Innovations' HR and Ethics division to work directly with the airline. They didn't just create new PowerPoint presentations, they redesigned the entire system. They implemented a new blind review system for complaints against senior staff, removing names and ranks to prevent bias. They developed immersive, scenario-based virtual reality training modules that put pilots and crew in the shoes of passengers from different backgrounds, forcing them to confront their own unconscious biases in a simulated environment. They tied executive bonuses directly to measurable improvements in diversity hiring and passenger satisfaction scores across all demographics. Zara even funded a new scholarship program in partnership with Orion Atlantic, aimed at bringing young men and women from underprivileged backgrounds into aviation, as pilots, engineers, and executives. The Sterling Skies Initiative, as it was called, was a direct answer to Croft's belief that some people don't belong. Zara was going to build a ladder to the sky for them. And what of Brenda, the gate agent caught in the crossfire? Zara's team made sure to review her file. They saw her hesitation, her attempts to validate the ticket, her clear discomfort with Croft's actions. A month later, Brenda was promoted to a station supervisor position. She received a personal handwritten note from Zara Sterling. It contained only 2 words: "Thank you." The final piece of the puzzle fell into place a year after the incident. Zara was back at JFK's Terminal 4, not as a passenger, but to unveil a new installation. In the center of the main concourse, where everyone could see it, was a large, dynamic digital display. It showed real-time data on flights, but it also cycled through stories and faces of the thousands of people who made the terminal work, from the baggage handlers and cleaners to the software engineers and executives. Below it was a simple, powerful quote attributed to Zara Sterling, CEO, Sterling Innovations. "This place belongs to everyone. The journey is for all." Across the country, in a noisy dispatch office for a long-haul trucking company in Omaha, Nebraska, a man with tired eyes and gray stubbled cheeks looked up at a small TV in the corner. He was a logistics coordinator now, a glorified clerk. His name was Alistair Croft. He routed trucks carrying produce and machine parts across the heartland. It was honest work, but it was a humbling, anonymous existence. The local news was on, running a national story about the Sterling Skies Initiative and the young, diverse group of pilot cadets who were its first graduates. One of them, a young black woman from the Bronx, was being interviewed. "I never thought someone who looks like me could ever command a plane," she said, her face beaming with pride. "Miss Sterling and this program didn't just give me wings. They showed me the sky was never off limits." Alistair watched, the styrofoam cup of coffee shaking slightly in his hand. He saw the future he had tried to deny, and he saw the woman he had wronged not as an enemy, but as a force of nature. He had been a gatekeeper of a tiny, gilded cage. She was a builder of launch pads. In his foolish attempt to keep one person out, he had inadvertently opened the door for thousands. He turned back to his screen, a map of the United States covered in blinking lights representing trucks. His kingdom was now a two-dimensional map, his command a crackling radio. The karma hadn't just been hard, it had been profound. It had taken everything from him, but in the emptiness that followed, it had left him with one single, undeniable truth. He had been on the wrong side of history. And history, like a 747 on takeoff, waits for no one. And there you have it. A story not just about a single moment of prejudice, but about the colliding forces of old-world arrogance and new-world power. Alistair Croft's fall from grace wasn't just punishment. It was a consequence, a direct result of his inability to see past his own biases. Zara Sterling's victory wasn't just in revealing her identity, it was in how she used her power afterwards, not for revenge, but for radical systemic change. It's a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about keeping people out, it's about lifting people up. What do you think? Was Croft's karma deserved? What would you have done in Zara's position? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, if it made you think, then please give this video a huge thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we have in store for you.